This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Nermeen Sheikh.
To talk more about the Koch brothers, we turn now to Daniel Schulman. He's a senior editor at Mother Jones Magazine, and his new book, just out this week, is Sons of Wichita: How the Koch brothers Became America's Most Powerful and Private Dynasty. The story is based on hundreds of interviews with Koch family and friends, as well as thousands of pages of legal documents. Daniel Schulman, we welcome you to Democracy Now! Explain why you wrote this book.
Well, in the 2010-2011 timeframe, you really started to see the Koch brothers become demonized and villainized, and they really became these cartoon villains behind the curtain of politics, and they were a caricature. I started looking into their story a little bit, and the one thing that first interested me was there are actually 4 Koch brothers, not 2. We always talk about Charles and David Koch. Of course, there are also Frederick and Bill Koch. These guys obviously have a phenomenally interesting political story, but their family story is just as fascinating to me.
Why don't you tell us in a nutshell that family story? Okay.
Well, their father, Fred Koch, in the 1920s develops a process for refining oil. His firm ends up getting sued by the major oil companies of the era. And in order to find work, he ends up having to look for contracts overseas. That leads him to work in Stalin's Soviet Union in the early 1930s, where his firm makes $5 million helping to modernize the Soviet oil industry. He's horrified by what he sees there, and when he returns home, he vows to do everything he can to fight communism. He ends up becoming a founding member of the John Birch Society, ultra-conservative group whose leader, Robert Welch, considered Dwight Eisenhower to be literally an agent of the communist conspiracy. Fred Koch is in the room literally when the John Birch Society is founded. Charles Koch becomes a member of the John Birch Society as a young man. His three other brothers.
To explain, especially for young people, John Birch Society, Ku Klux Klan, what were their relationships, or the kind of issues, the similarities?
John Birch Society, was certainly accused of racism, and they rejected, and anti-Semitism actually, and they rejected a lot of those charges. Their thing was very much they saw the evidence of communist subversion behind every move of government.
Like Senator Joe McCarthy.
Like McCarthy. They accused Martin Luther King of being a communist agent, that sort of thing. They thought the UN was a tool of bringing about a one-world government. You hear a lot of this today in the Tea Party rhetoric, and indeed there is kind of a direct through line from the John Birch Society to the Tea Party. But in terms of, there are 3 other Koch brothers. Frederick is the eldest. He never went into the family business. He is really a philanthropist and an art collector who's spent his life restoring a series of really fabulous historic homes around the world. I had the opportunity to tour one of them on the Upper East Side. Amazing stuff in there, including Marie Antoinette's bed. That's the rarest object in the house.
Did you get to sleep in it?
No guests get to sleep in it. Unfortunately, no. Unfortunately, no. David and Bill Koch are the youngest of the Koch brothers. They're fraternal twins. And in terms of the feud that broke out between the brothers, this is really what, is fascinating about this family. And this has its roots back in childhood. These 4 brothers ended up pairing off Charles and David versus Frederick and Bill over the business empire their father bequeathed to them. And it was basically 2 decades of the most brutal legal fighting you could ever imagine. We're talking private detectives snooping through each other's trash. They believed moles had been inserted within the ranks of each other's, enterprises, that sort of stuff. And they really bared these truly, it was brutal in terms of the testimony that they were forced to give about their childhood and their relationships with each other. And, Frederick was partially disinherited by their father when he died in 1967. And that sort of carried a sting that really never quite went away. And so all of this really came out in the most public of settings for the most private of families. And it was quite poignant.